Welcome everyone to the Xojo webinar. I'm Paul Lefevre, the Xojo Developer Evangelist, and our topic this time is web toolbars. So just a few high-level pieces of information before we jump right into Xojo and look at some examples. When it comes to web projects, toolbars are a control in the library, rather than, if you remember, with desktop projects, toolbars are actually another project item. So with web projects, they're a control in the library. And you can just drag them onto your layout. And some of the features you can have with web toolbars are, of course, they can have a caption and icon. They can have a tooltip for when the mouse hovers over it. And there are various button styles. And one cool thing you can do with web toolbars is you can have containers embedded in the toolbar. So the button styles are the usual button, a button toolbar button. That means you can click it. You can also manually toggle it to show that it's like depressed if you wanted it to indicate state. You can have a button display a menu when it is clicked. And a button can appear as a separator and then it's not clickable, or a space or a flexible space, which is a space that allows you to essentially have buttons that are right justified. And then I mentioned the container before. That's actually a button style. And when you set a button style to container, you can then select a container control in your project that will appear within the toolbar. If you're doing a toolbar, you're probably going to want icons so that they look nice. And you can add icons to your project using image sets, just like with desktop and iOS projects. And you want to provide at least 1x and 2x sizes so that your images look their best on standard screens and on Retina or high DPI screens. And then once it's in your project, you can just choose from the list of icons that are in your project which one to use with a particular toolbar button. And I pointed these out in the desktop toolbar video. But here's a few useful places for some icons. Fat Cow has kind of a smaller set as far as size goes. They have both 16 by 16 and 32 by 32 sizes, so that can work for 1x and 2x sizes. They're not quite as big as you might use, but sometimes you want smaller icons. They do have a lot. I think there's almost 4,000 icons in their set. You can grab that from their website. Open Iconic has some open source icons available, not nearly as many. These are numbered in the hundreds. I think these are mostly kind of monochrome blackish coloring. But you can check that out there and see some examples and download the icon set. And then Icons 8 has a few free ones. I'm not sure if they're all free. I don't think they are. And you can subscribe to them and then have access to a lot of icons. And they put out new ones regularly. So you can check them out at icons8.com. With a toolbar on a web page, you're going to handle your button presses on the toolbar using toolbar events. And there's two. There's the button action event, which is called when an actual button is clicked. And there's the menu action event that is called when you click on a button that has a menu assigned to it, and then when one of the menu items is actually clicked. And you can also create buttons and control and move them around and do whatever you want with buttons that are on a toolbar dynamically when your program is running, rather than doing it all up front at design time. And there's a variety of methods that are available to you. You can use append or insert to add new buttons to the toolbar. You can use the item at index, item with name to find particular buttons that are already on the toolbar. You can remove buttons from the toolbar, and you can get a count of how many are on the toolbar. So that would allow you to even, you could use item at index to iterate through all the buttons on the toolbar, for example. Lots of different options here. And then each of the button display types have their own classes. Not I mean, you only need to worry about these when you are doing things dynamically, generally speaking. So you just create an instance of this when you want to add, append it or insert it or whatnot. All right, let's switch into Xojo and look at a few examples of how we can do toolbars. All right, so here I just have a standard web project that's open. Nothing really in it yet. It's just a blank web page. So if I want to add a toolbar, I can go to the library, and it's right here in the button section right at the top, and I can just drag it over and put it where I want. In the case of web toolbars, you can actually put them wherever you want. You don't have to necessarily put them on the top, although that obviously is a common place to see toolbars. And editing this, you're like, all right, great, now what? Well, you click the little button right here, the little edit. It's a little pencil edit icon. And when you click that, it puts the toolbar in edit mode. And you can see it kind of changes its look here. It's kind of highlighted, and there's now a little plus indicator here. And you can click that to add things to the toolbar. So you can choose what you want to add. So if you want to add a button, you can add the button. And then once it's added, the specific button's properties are then what you're seeing here in the navigator. So you can give it its name. You can see what its actual class is. You can give it a caption. I can type without letting go of the shift properly. We haven't added any icons to the project yet, so there's not going to be any to choose from. And then you could set whether it's going to be toggled on or off, and whether it's actually enabled, which means the user can click on it. We can add an icon to the project here. So I'll put in both 1x and 2x sizes. And if I come back to, I guess I gotta come back here and go back to edit mode and then click on it. I can see the icon right here on it now. It shows up with the icon there in the preview mode. And I can click anywhere to get out of edit mode and then back to the toolbar itself being selected with its properties here. And if you do like playing around with web styles or whatnot, there's all kinds of styles you can attach to toolbars to make them look however you want instead of the standard look and feel. So right now I've got a toolbar. It's just a single button on it. And if I want to handle something when that's clicked, I can add the event to it. So the button action event is what gets called when it is pressed. And you can see here, it passes in which button was pressed. So then I have access to the properties so I can check what I want. So checking the name is probably the best idea. We call that save button, since the name is not likely to change as often. You could check the caption or other things, but if you localize or just tweak the text in the inspector, you might find that all of a sudden your code doesn't quite do what you want. Yeah, I don't think I pre-launched stuff properly on this computer, so let me try relaunching that again. There we go. So I've now got my toolbar button here. You see the whole toolbar runs the length of the web page. And when I click it, it called that event and properly displayed the message box to show that it was clicked. So that's, very simply how you set up the toolbar. How the initial editing works. You can, of course, have as many as you want. You can put a flexible space there. And then when you add a button after a flexible space, it appears on the right. So you can lay this out however you want for your toolbar to work. So let's look at a couple examples that have some of the other features in them. So first here, I want to show you a toolbar that has a menu in it. So here I've got a toolbar with two buttons on it, a save button and a status button. The status button is actually a menu button. So if you see here, the save is just the regular button, nothing fancy there. And then status button is a toolbar menu button. Now you can't assign the menu here in the editor, in the designer. You have to do that in code, but you do want to tell it that it is a menu button so that you can add the menu to it. So everything else about that is the same. And if we look at the code here in the open event, I'm just creating a menu using web menu item and then appending some items to it. And then I need to attach that menu to the status button. So in order to do that, I actually have to look up the status button. So here you can see I'm using the item with name method to look up the button that's called status button. So that's great. But item with name, as you can see down here on the bottom, returns a web toolbar item. So we need to cast it to be a web toolbar menu so that we can access the menu property. So that's what this line of code is doing here. And then all that does is attach the menu. So now when we run the project here, we can click the save button. It does its usual thing. And we click the status, we get our menu with our three items that we put in here. And then as we choose one, we know which one was picked. So we can do what we need to do. So pretty straightforward with this. You just have to create your menu, find your menu button, and attach the menu to it. All right, let's look at a container. So you can see here with this toolbar, we've still got our standard save button, but here I've got a search field kind of embedded here in the toolbar. So how is that done? Well, first thing you want to do is you want to create a container control. So this here is a web container, and its layout has on it just a search field added to it. And there are a couple bits of code here. So the first thing is I set a property on this container that I can set that points back to the page. And this will allow the code to actually update things that are on the page. So in this case, what our example is going to do is when we type in some code here in the search field, it's going to save what you typed in this recent searches list box here on the page itself. And it does that by checking each time you press enter on something in there. If you've typed any text, it'll add it to the searches list. How do you set up the toolbar? Well, you've got your container control. You're going to set up your toolbar the same as you always do. And when you click add here, you're going to add a container, which is what I've done here. And you can see it shows that it's a container. You can set a caption here. And then for the target, you pick the actual container control you created. So in my case, that's search field, the search field we've created here. And then you can set the width for how wide you want the container to appear. And then the last bit of code that kind of hooks all this up together is to link that container search field back to the page so that we can access it to set the parent page property. So we do the same lookup that we did for the menu button using item with name, except this time we're casting it to a web toolbar container. And then I'm getting the search field, which is the controller or the container that's on that toolbar button, because it's a container toolbar button. And then I can set its parent page property just to the web page itself. That kind of hooks all that up so that things can access what we want them to access. So with that in place, we've now got our toolbar, and I can type something here, and it works just like a search field. And what you type shows up here because we're saving the recent searches. Now, you may not normally want to display those, but you do what you want with that information. And it doesn't have to be just a simple search field. That looks pretty cool. You can, design whatever you want that makes sense in there. Wouldn't go too crazy, but it is a nice capability to have a powerful toolbar. All right, next example here is creating a toolbar dynamically. So here I have a page, and it has a toolbar on it, but it has no buttons assigned here in the layout. It's just empty. And what's going to happen is there's code on this standard button here that's going to add 3 buttons to the layout and a flexible space. And then there'll be code here that will disable one of the buttons and then actually remove one of the buttons. So let's look at the code here in order. So adding each button, the code's very similar for each button you want to add. So here, the first thing it does is check if the button's already there. So in this particular case, so that if you click that, this code runs multiple times, it won't add the button repeatedly. So it's checking if the button's not there. I'm going to add it. So it creates a new web toolbar button, sets its properties, including an icon, sets it enabled because it will be disabled by default. And then it appends it to the toolbar. So all pretty straightforward, standard use of a class. Save button works the same way. And then print button has a slight change to it because we want the print button to appear on the right side of the toolbar. We'll put a flexible space before it. So here I'm creating a flexible space and then appending it to the toolbar. And then I create a print button and I add that to the toolbar using the same code pretty much as above. And that adds, when it's clicked, will populate the toolbar with 3 buttons. The code to disable a specific button uses item with name to find the button that's on there. And if it is on the toolbar, it can be cast back to a web toolbar button so that we can then disable it or modify any of its other properties or do whatever we wanted to do. And then removal, slightly different here. In the case of removing a button, the remove item method only takes in an index parameter, so just an integer position, 0-based of the button on the toolbar. So we can't just look it up by its name because that doesn't really give us an index. So what we'll do instead here, and probably it works better as well since we actually want to remove 2 things. We want to remove the print button. We also want to remove its companion flexible space. So what this code does is it just loops through all the buttons on the toolbar. And once it finds the print button, it removes it. And once it finds the flexible space, it removes it. And the important thing to note here is we're counting in reverse order so that it doesn't mess up the count. Because if you count upwards, say you were going 0 to 3, and then you remove 3, well, now all of a sudden you're going to 0 to 2, and the counting changing in a for loop dynamically like that may cause the for loop to terminate before you probably expected. So it's always better to count backwards like this. So let's run this and see what that looks like. So here we have all three buttons were added. I can click on a button still and check that it was pressed. I can now disable it and not able to click on it. And then I can click the remove button and it's removed from the toolbar. And that is pretty much it. That's kind of three different ways that you can use some of the features on a toolbar. So I like to remind everyone, you can always grab the latest version of Xojo from xojo.com/download. Current version is 2018 release 2, which just came out this month. So be sure to check that out if you haven't already. For those new to Xojo, we have the free Introduction to Programming book available at xojo.com/learn. Our great user community is at forum.xojo.com. There is a Getting Started section, a web section, sections for whatever you might have for questions, and it's also handy. I find a lot of people tell me they just go there to look up answers to things that have already been asked and answered. So definitely worth checking out, even if you're maybe a little shy and aren't up to answering other people's questions just yet. And of course, you can learn more at the Xojo Dev Center, developer.xojo.com. And in the user guide, there is a section on web buttons and toolbars, which you can refer to there as well. And of course, I can always be reached via email, paul@xojo.com, and on Twitter, @Lefevre, is where you'll find me. And the official Xojo account is @Xojo. Let's see, I got a question here from Gills asking, is it possible to insert a toolbar into a container and then insert the container into a web page? Actually, I think I have a project that actually does that. I'm going to check I think the shared toolbar example might be that exactly it. Yes, it is. So yeah, you certainly can do that. This example here has a container, and in it is a web toolbar, and it's actually an example of using the same toolbar on multiple pages. So here I have a main page that has that on it, settings page, and then a browser page, and then clicking one of the buttons switches to one of the other pages. And yeah, that the code on the button here isn't very clever or anything. It's just showing the pages when a particular button is clicked. So yeah, that certainly can work. And as always, containers are a great way to reuse components. All right, I want to thank everyone for attending. Have a great day.